Well, guys, you are in for a treat tonight. We have the one, the only, the famous quadratic formula. So saddle up and let's get ready to ride. Alright, so let's solve this quadratic equation. Now, you might be thinking this is pretty simple. We've done it in Algebra 1. We've done it this year. Let's just take our time and solve. We're going to add, multiply, and add. So, of course, x by x. 5, I'm thinking 5 and 1. And if I need a negative 5, that means the signs are different. So I'm going to go with negative 5, positive 1. Now, if I stop there, I've only talked about the word factor. When it says solve, I actually have to go a step further and tee it up. And I just simply said each side equal to 0. So here I would get x equals 5. And here I would get x equals negative 1. Now, again, you might be thinking, pretty simple, Mrs. Hill. But have you ever thought about this? And maybe you have, and maybe we've talked about it a little bit and told you to hold off and wait a few weeks. What happens when you cannot factor? Have you ever considered that? Do you think every problem in the world is going to work out so nicely that it gets factored? What happens when you can't do it? Well, take this example. I have to multiply to 1. Alright, so my only options are 1 and 1. Right? That's the only thing that multiplies to 1. And the only thing that multiplies to 1 is either they're both positive or they're both negative. Can that ever add up to 6? No, of course not. So what happens? Do we just quit? Do we throw the towel in? What do we do when we can't factor? Well, here's the answer to that question. Here is exactly what we do. We introduce you to the quadratic formula. Now, hopefully you're as happy as these excited people. The quadratic formula is one of our favorite formulas, and here's what it looks like. So and this should be in your notebook, nicely boxed in, nice and neat. We're going to use this a million times this year. The solutions to the quadratic equation, ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0, assuming a does not equal 0, are given by, here it is, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Now, lots of people have songs to memorize this. You are lucky I am not going to sing to you, but I'm sure if you have Mr. Hill and you ask him, he would love to sing the quadratic formula song to you. But feel free, there's lots of songs like to Pop Goes the Weasel, to Jingle Bells. Feel free to YouTube quadratic formula songs to help you memorize them. Alright, so we're going to solve using the quadratic formula. Now notice this is the same equation. So if you look back, what were our answers that we had before? We already know what the answers should be. When we factored it, we said it's x minus 5 and x plus 1. So I had x equals 5 and x equals negative 1. So I know I should get the same answers. We're just going to solve it differently using this quadratic formula. So let's start. Always start by writing the quadratic formula down. And the more you say it out loud to yourself, the easier it will be to memorize. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c divided by 2a. Now, I know it looks intimidating, but I promise it's not that bad. Alright, so let's just refresh. A quadratic equation looks like ax squared plus bx plus c. So my first goal is just to identify who the a, the b, and the c are in this equation. And this takes about, 10 seconds. A is always the number in front of x squared. So I look at my x squared. If I don't see an actual number, remember there's always a 1 there. B is in front of the x, so that's a negative 4. C is the constant by itself, that's a negative 5. Now you just plug them in. So I'm going to say x equals, it says take your b and make it negative. Well, if my b is negative, it's now going to become a positive, plus or minus. Now, I do want this starred in your notebook. There's 2 super important things. The first one is to use parentheses. Okay, when you substitute in here, make sure you have them in parentheses. So I'm going to say this is negative 4. Notice the squared goes on the outside. Minus 4 times 1 times negative 5 divided by, you can do this bottom in your head, it's highly recommended there. 2 times a is just 2. Alright, the second most important part is you can use part of your calculator at this point to type this junk in, but I just want to be sure, so let's put calc there, calculator. I just want to be clear, do not type in the radical. So to be even more clear, I want to show you what I typed in my calculator. Notice, I do not have a radical. I just have this junk that was under there with my parentheses squared on the outside. So as I can continue, I can now say I have 4 plus or minus, keep the radical, and basically cross that off, and in place of it put 36 divided by 2. All right, now we're almost done. I'm going to say this is x equals, I'm basically simplifying my top. You always start on top, bottom last. Do you know what this answer is? Do we know what the square root of 36 is? Of course we do. It's 6 divided by 2. Now at this point, I just want to be clear, again we're going to get 2 answers because of that plus minus. I get x equals 4 plus 6 divided by 2, and x equals 4 minus 6 divided by 2. Let's go one step further. What do we actually get on top? Well, that's 10 divided by 2 is 5. And here I get negative 2 divided by 2 is negative 1. Were those indeed the same 2 exact answers that we had when we factored? Well, yeah, of course they were. We solved the same equation, just a different way. Now, basically what that tells me is if I get 2 nice whole number answers like that, that basically tells me that that question could be factored. We're going to do a lot of questions that cannot be factored. But again, if I get 2 nice answers, that means I could have factored in the beginning. All right, example 3. Which of the following represents the solutions to this equation? Now, here's what my gut says, and hopefully yours is saying the same thing. Do you ever get answers like this when you factor? Heck no, you get 2 nice answers. So basically, if I see a radical, my gut has to tell me to use the quadratic formula anytime I see a radical in an answer. All right, so I don't have to waste my time. It's not going to factor because there are no nice answers. So I'm going to go straight to the quadratic formula. So try to do it without looking back at your notes there. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Off to the side, what's a, b, and c? Are you right? A is 1, b is, just watch that whole term, negative 10, and c is a positive 20. All right, at this point, pause it. Substitute in with parentheses and see if we get the same thing. Does yours look exactly like mine? Did you catch that this becomes a positive 10? The negative b plus or minus, parentheses squared, minus 4, parentheses, parentheses, and you can do the 2 times a in your head. All right, you did the hard part. Basically, go to your calculator, type in the junk under the radical, but again, not the radical. Pause it, see what you get. I got a 20 under there. Hopefully you got the same thing. All right, now, do we actually know the square root of 20? Okay, so let's add this new piece in there. The next piece is to simplify the top. Okay, then we go to the bottom. So it's x equals 10 plus or minus. I can simplify that radical. How can I break 20 down? Use those perfect squares. I'm going to go with a 4 and a 5. And again, this is still all over 2. All right, you just keep simplifying the top. X equals 10 plus or minus. That becomes a 2 radical 5 all over a 2. Now, we've talked about dividing. Okay, what could you pull out on top? I could factor out the number 2, and I'm left with 5 plus or minus radical 5 all over 2. Remember, this is divisible by 2 and that's divisible by 2, so factor it out. And then I can cancel this 2 on top with this 2 on the bottom. So I get x equals 5 plus or minus radical 5. Let's scroll back up and see if that was a choice. We said 5 plus or minus radical 5. So I can kill this one, and I am definitely going to go with choice 4. All right, at this point, before we do our last problem, I want to practice just simplifying our quadratic formula. Plugging the numbers in is pretty straightforward. It's the simplifying part that people tend to screw up. So I want to review that you're going to go to the radical first, and then we're going to factor the top. All right, in that order. You can't screw this order up. It's got to be radical first, then factor the top. So I can say this is equal to x equals 4 plus or minus, I'm going to go 9 and 2 all over 6. Okay, and it's just a lot of little baby steps. So I get 4 plus or minus, the 9 turns into a 3 radical 2 all over 6. Can I now factor the top? Can I pull something out of each of those? Well, the answer is no. There's nothing that goes into 4 and 3 besides 1. So this is done. This cannot get simplified anymore. All right, if you can't factor the top, you are done. Now, every now and then, they're going to want this answer to the nearest, let's say, 100th. All right, that means you've got to go to your calculator and type this in. So I want to practice doing that. Now, there's two different versions. If you have the TI-84 and it's been updated, you know it's been updated if you have that fraction button. I want you to grab your calculator and hit alpha y equals. Okay, and the very first thing in there is the numerator denominator, and when you hit that, it should pop up like this. You have the advantage because you can literally type this in and get the number. You're going to go 4 plus 3 radical 2, arrow down, and hit divided by 6. When you do that, I want you to write your decimal to the nearest 100th. You have to do it twice then because now you'll have to type in the 4 minus 3 radical 2 all over 6. So those of you with the updated calculator, you're lucky. You've got this nice tool. Now, those of you with the TI-83, all right, you just have to be extremely careful about parentheses. Here's how you're typing it in. You're opening a parenthesis. You are typing in the top 4 plus 3 radical 2, closing it, then divided by, put the bottom in parentheses and close that one. Okay, we'll get the same answer. Yours is just a lot uglier because you don't have that fraction tool and it's just not possible to update. The calculator's just too old. So what I've done is I've took a screen capture of my calculator, and you can see if you have the updated version, that's what it should look like. If you have the old TI-83, you're going to have to use a lot of parentheses and be careful, but either way we're getting the same answer. Now you'll obviously have to do it twice because you'll have to do the 4 plus, and then you'll have to do the 4 minus the radical 3 radical 2 over 6. All right, let's practice simplifying another one. Again, getting to this part's easy. It's the simplifying that's a little more complicated. Remember, you start in the radical and then factor. So I'm going to say this is 2 plus or minus. Hopefully you're thinking the same thing. I'm going 4 times 6 is 24, all over 10. And then I would say that's equal to, square root of 4 is 2. So I get 2 plus or minus 2 radical 6 all over 10. Okay, now I factor the top. All right, factor, factor, factor. I can pull out the number 2. Now be careful. Okay, that doesn't disappear. I still have to have something plus or minus something. What number should be left here? A 1 plus or minus 1 radical 6. Okay, make sure you take 2 seconds, and if you distribute back, you get what you started with. All over 10. Lastly, I can say 2 goes into 10 5 times, so my final answer is 1 plus or minus radical 6 all over 5. All right, and then just practice one more time getting those decimals on your calculator. We'll say 3 decimal places. Grab that calculator and practice one more time. So again, I've got my work up there from my calculator, both with the new version and old version, and I would round to 3 decimal places or whatever it says. Well, we've got one more big bear for us tonight. All right, so you've seen the quadratic formula, not too hard, and it's just a lot of practice for the next couple examples here. So let's take your time. It does say solve each equation, quadratic equation with the quadratic formula. Some answers are purely rational numbers, and some will involve irrational numbers. Those are our radicals we're going to break down. Always express in simplest form. All right, so let's do that first one together again. All right, so let's just identify our A, B, and C. I'm going to say A equals 3, B equals 5, and C equals 2. All right, let's jot her down. X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. Okay, we're going to carefully plug them in. X equals, take my b and make it negative. Negative 5 plus or minus the square root. Lots of parentheses when we substitute in. And the 2a do in your head, 2 times 3 is 6. All right, so let's grab that calculator. You're just typing the junk under the radical, not the radical. All right, I got a nice solid 1. Okay, now, do I know the square root of 1 or do I have to simplify it? Well, that's one I know. So I'm going to say I get x equals negative 5 plus or minus, we always start on the top first, the square root of 1 is 1 all over 6. And now I'm going to split my two answers because this is a whole number. I get negative 5 plus 1 all over 6 and negative 5 minus 1 all over 6. So negative 5 plus 1 is negative 4 over 6, and this becomes negative 6 over 6, which is negative 1. And you could obviously reduce this to negative 2/3. All right, now what does that tell me? Because I got two nice answers, nice because there's no radical, that tells me that question actually could have been factored. All right, we just went the long way with quadratic formula, but it could have been factored. All right, let's try the next one. Same thing, let's identify our A, our B, and our C. I would say A is 1, B is negative 8, and C is 13. All right, now again, we don't get the best practice unless you actually pause it and try it on your own. So set up the formula, pause it, go as far as you can, and see if we get the same thing. Don't cheat yourself now. How does mine look compared to yours? I've got x equals negative b plus or minus b squared minus 4ac divided by 2a. I got a 12 under mine. So watch how I clean it up. Remember, you clean up the top first. I get x equals 8 plus or minus. Now I don't know the square root of 12, but I can break it down. I'm going to go with 4 times 3 all over 2. And you keep cleaning up the top. X equals 8 plus or minus, that becomes 2 radical 3 divided by 2. Factor the top out. X equals 2 times 4 plus or minus radical 3 all over 2. And those 2's are going to cancel. So I get 4 plus or minus radical 3. So remember, there are two answers there. There's 4 plus radical 3 and 4 minus radical 3. All right, let's do it again. Question C. Identify your A, B, and C. So I would say A equals 2, B equals negative 2, and C equals negative 5. All right, take your time, plug them in your quadratic formula, and compare to mine. Pause it, see what you get. So check out mine so far. Hopefully you got 44 under the radical 2 and I didn't make a mistake. So again, just say to yourself, top first. I get x equals 2 plus or minus. I can break 44 down. I'm going to go with 4 times 11. All right, so I'm going to get x equals 2 plus or minus. That becomes a 2 radical 11 all over 4. All right, now the important piece. You're still working on the top only. Factor the top. What does this term and this term have in common? Well, you can pull out a 2, but just be careful what's left when you do that. There has to be something plus something. I would say 1 plus radical 11. Now I just want to be clear why there has to be a 1 here. When you take this 2 and FOIL it back in, you have to get what you started with. Now watch this one reduce. Does this 2 and 4 disappear completely? Well, no. That 2 disappears, but the 4 turns into a 2. So I get 1 plus or minus radical 11 all over 2. All right, well, we've had a lot of practice. We've got one last one for you to put in your notebook. Let me see if I can find this bad boy. And there it is. I will rewrite it down here. This goes in your notebook as question D, and we want it simplified as possible. So we've got 5x squared plus 8x minus 4 equals 0. All right, so you are on your own tonight. If you need help, you know where to find us, and have a great night.